Well, hi. You're here. I was mending this. We used to talk about conspiracies all the time. All the time. It was considered a normal discourse of conversation. Then something happened in the late 80s through the 90s where they started to portray conspiracy theory in two ways. One, it was the pursuit of an unstable mind, and secondly, it was rooted in the same things that paranormal things. So, for instance, if you were interested in the JFK assassination, or if someone was writing, say someone was writing about conspiracy theories, and they would talk about they say, well, there's people believe, conspiracy theories out there ranging from JFK to Bigfoot to the moon hoax landing to 9/11 to Elvis is still alive. You see how cynical and clever that is? They linked in Fortean and paranormal, which is a completely different thing altogether, with actual like power conspiracy stuff, in order to make it seem that anyone who might have suspicions about the assassination of JFK, well, also believes that Elvis is still alive and living on Mars or something. And that was part of the psyop to destroy any kind of conspiracy. Now, we know for a fact now that conspiracy is a lot of the conspiracies that I grew up on, like the JFK assassination. Well, like now the latest stuff coming out, who Woodward was, he was actually a naval intelligence officer who was put into the Washington Post with the specific brief of destroying President Nixon with the fake Watergate scandal, so as to protect the CIA deep state from him and another Warren, an actual objective Warren Commission this time, to open up the case again, because Nixon had found out that the CIA had murdered JFK, and people like George Bush Sr. were in Dallas on that day, and all this kind of other thing. And the Warren Commission was actually oversaw, was one of the Warren Commission top people was Henry Ford, who became the president after Nixon. It was all stitched up. It was completely stitched up. We all know that's all out in the open now, not hidden. But yeah, if you were to say that, like even a few years ago, they would say, "Oh yeah, right, right," and Bigfoot is Bigfoot faked moon landings, that kind of thing. This is how it happens. Just now, this is the difference I have to make between. This is why I make distinctions between a conspiracy theorist and a truther. A conspiracy theorist, one that's actual rational and tries to be objective, doesn't make the assumption that accusations and guilt are the same thing, and that implementation and outcome are the same thing. So, for instance, if accusations, say the most appalling one in the recent last 20 years was the Hampstead hoax, where these two children had been groomed by a borderline and her cook to get back her ex-husband, to make up fake stories that children were being raped and eaten inside a McDonald's by a church group in Hampstead in London. That went from kids clearly being groomed on camera to guilt, and you had like all these lunatics and muppets. Thankfully, some of them ended up in prison, walking around Hampstead, following parishioners outside the church, going, "Satanic pedophile, Satanic pedophile." That's a truther. The truther, they can't tell the difference between accusation and guilt. Two different things. It goes from A to Z. They just skip all the letters from in between and go directly from A to Z. The same thing with implementation and outcome. When they hear someone at Davos at the World Economic Forum talking about the most batshit crazy concept to put us all into little glass cities that are 9 miles long, these technocrat wankfests, they assume that this is already a fact. Another one was like the mandatory vax during the scandemic. They were all thought they're going to kick our doors down and inject us. No, that's not implementation and outcome are two different things. And you see, these are bad. These are bad in two different ways. So, for instance, if you believe accusation and guilt is the same thing, well, that's what led to in the past to things like witch hunts and pogroms and genocides and things like all kinds of horrible things like that, because people heard an accusation and went directly to guilt. So that's a truther thing. The other thing would be, in terms of implementation and outcome, that your self-fulfilling prophecy to make the worst come true. So instead of saying we'll disrupt this bullshit along the way, you kind of self-hexed yourself to believe that it's not the worst has already happened. So a conspiracy theorist looks at an accusation, a true conspiracy theorist like me, looks at an accusation and doesn't assume guilt. They work through all the letters in between to see if there's anything to it. Likewise, with implementation and outcome, they do the same. They look at all the letters in between and say, well, is it really happening? How far are they coming? Are they really going to do this? Or is it all bullshit? Or are they playing games? Same thing. And, same thing with accusation and guilt. Well, what's the real story here? Is someone trying to get back at someone else, or is it really the truth? So let's go through conspiracies that are bullshit right off the bat, because these are the ones, if people get these out of the way, then they can actually go and work on and study the real things. The flat earth. The flat earth is absolute bollocks. I mean, it's bollocks. Don't even try to tell me it isn't, okay? Those people who think that it's based exclusively on a belief that the Bible is telling the truth and it's a science book, and secondly, that you need a spaceship to actually see the earth as a circle. No, that's not true at all. You can stand on the coast of Red Bank, New Jersey with a powerful pair of binoculars. You look across at Brooklyn and the street level is below the sea. That's because it's behind the curve. You can stand on Burnham Sea in Somerset in England and look across the sea towards Cardiff in Wales, and the street level of Cardiff is below the sea. That's because it's behind the curvature of the earth. You can do the same at Lake Michigan, looking towards Chicago. You can see the Sears Towers sticking above. You don't see the street level, you see the top of the Sears Tower. And the same thing if you stand in Howth in Dublin, you can see Wales, the mountains of Wales across the sea, but you can't see Holyhead, and and likewise people standing on the mountains of Wales can only see the tall buildings in Dublin. They can't see the streets or the beaches on the coast. And that's because it's all behind the curve. Secondly, you cannot see the Ursa Minor, the Great Bear, the Little Bear constellation of Polaris in the southern hemisphere. Likewise, you can't see the Southern Cross in the northern hemisphere because they're on the bottom of the top of the earth. Flat earth, dead right then. Right there and dead. You don't even have to do anything else. It's dead there and then. It's obvious we're living on a sphere. Dead, gone. Okay? So don't give me that one. So that's insane, that one. That one is actually just so... I believe that cult of the flat earth in recent decades has actually damaged the cause of people looking into other real conspiracies. And it may have been put out there for that reason. And another factor to this about that, while I don't have anything against people exploring these things, but once you know, what's the point if you know that the curvature of the earth is visible from many shorelines around the world, looking across to other land masses, and secondly that the constellations in the northern hemisphere are different than the ones in the southern hemisphere? Why even go that far? It's obvious it's a ball, a spinning ball. And they'll say things like, oh, well, Copernicus discovered the heliocentric system before telescopes were invented. What does that mean? Kepler and Tycho Brahe had done complex calculations on planetary motions and the movement of the stars in relation to the planets before Copernicus, around the time of Copernicus and all this. These were complex mathematical things that were worked out and turned out to be the truth. They didn't need to go. Copernicus didn't need to fly into space to see a heliocentric thing. And you see some of the memes, they're retarded. Heliocentric, hell and essential to the trick. They're so stupid they are. And the amount of effort and time that wastes when you could be looking at really interesting and real rabbit holes that actually will have something fruitful at the end of it. And that's the flat earth thing is just outrageously horrible, the existence of it. Another one is this grand Tateria bullshit that kind of spooled out of it. The belief that there was Siberia used, yes, that's true. Siberia used to be called Tateria. That was the Tatars are real people. Where do you think Tatar source comes from? But this whole thing that it spins into this thing that the earth was flooded in mud, that the whole earth was the grand Tateria. And it was some kind of like idealistic world where they used spires in buildings to channel energy, free Tesla energy, and just crap. And then they show pictures of like grand exhibitions in places like St. Louis and Paris, where they're basically plywood buildings covered in plaster that are temporary, constructions that were torn down after the exhibition was over. And they say, oh, where are these cities gone? They post pictures of German cities before they were bombed to bits by the Allies and say, oh, the Tyrian conspiracy. They were all flooded in mud and this crap. The whole planet was flooded in mud, all this bollocks. And they point to buildings to show them like the window on the ground floor half filled up. And they say, oh, there's proof of the mud flood. No, that's proof of two things. Ground levels rising in cities on purpose, and also things like water tables increasing and the basements becoming flooded. That's the first one. A common one is in many American cities you have places called Atlanta Underground or Seattle Underground, and these are the parts of the cities that were not filled in and they remained at their original level. But lots of flooding and things like that had to be built, barriers were built, and rivers were overflowing. They had to bring up street levels. But the most common one in America is fire. The reason why you have those basements in American buildings half buried is because of fire. In the late 1800s, American cities were literally burning to the ground. They had catastrophic fires in the 1800s in American cities. So they developed these systems of laying water pipes and also things called loops, which were alarms you could pull that would go to local fire brigade, city loops, and long and water pipes for hydrants. And the easiest way to do this, and of course because the cities were in danger, the residents said yes, was to lay the pipes at street level. Just lay them at street level, right? And then fill not dig trenches, but then fill the pipes, the utility pipes, the soil on top of that. So rather than you digging down to lay pipes, which would have taken a long time and be very disruptive, they just laid the pipes on the surface and put soil on top of that and built a new road and a new footpath. And the reason why it was not too bad in America was because a lot of buildings, because of Beaux Arts architecture, there were stoops, the steps going up. So the first floor was already up. Downstairs where the servants used to live. Servants weren't that popular anymore, and so they filled in the basement. It also dealt with the damp, and they had the people said, "Yeah, go for it." Jesus, we can't have cities burning down anymore. And yet this is all easily discovered. But yet, Grand Tatarian mud flood. Another one is the star forts. That these forts are shaped like stars. They hear the word star and they think spaceship. That's really what that is, right? That's how stupid it is. Star forts are designed so they're easy to shoot at. The more walls you look, if you have 4 walls like that on a castle, right? That's 4 walls that the enemy has to attack, right? But if you make it in a star shape, you have 16 walls. So you're more safer inside the castle. Also, you have different angles and places you can shoot at. And it makes attacking the fort very difficult if it's being assaulted. That's why it's shaped like a fort, a star. Not because it's something to do with spaceship, starship, or free Tesla energy. I mean, it's just unbelievable that people believe this crap. And it causes shite for the rest of us. The belief that space doesn't exist is another one. I won't even go there. I'm not even going to go that one. But that's it, right? And we see now, they're all tied in with a belief that if these are lies, then everything else is a lie, and that's the most stupidest logic I've ever heard. Okay, that's stupid logic. Okay, now for other conspiracy theories, they tie into 2 things, right? I would put them in the field of, well, that's a bit interesting. That's a bit strange, and oh yeah, that's definitely a conspiracy. So in the world of, well, that's a bit strange, I would put, initially for me it was the moon landing. For a long time, I didn't say that I believed the moon landing was a hoax, but there were things in it I didn't fully get, and that was because I didn't have a good enough knowledge of rocketry. Good enough knowledge of how these systems work, these engineering systems work. And I studied hard. I looked around and figured out they did go to the moon. They did. Now that was a learning process. I now firmly believe that the Apollo moon landings happened, but with a proviso. I think that they got the fright of their lives out there, and something happened up on the moon, or on the way to the moon, that made them realize that manned space travel was not going to be like the Jetsons or Star Trek, and it was going to be very difficult, if not impossible. And they may have even foisted the moon landing hoax as a means of people of not having to go into space ever again. And this whole thing about the Van Allen belt, you can get through the Van Allen belt, no problem. It's thinner at the top than it is at the bottom. That's why the Apollo went through the top part. It's risky, but it's still doable. These were military men. This is another thing too. They had no rights. Incredibly brave military men, I might add. And so the moon landings happened. As far as yes, for years for me it was like, what's really going on here? But now I totally believe in it. Another one is 9/11. Like 9/11 is full of more holes than a Swiss cheese. But do I know who did it? No. Well, other than the Saudis, I know the Saudis did it. They were Saudis in those planes. Whether they were patsies or not, I don't know. I don't have enough information. But there's still loads of things that are outstanding with that. The Building 7 thing, that has never been adequately answered for me. And I make no apology for that. And also the 5 dancing Israelis, that's never been adequately answered for me, ever. And that's a bit dodgy. I'd put that in that league. And I think that most of the conspiracies I'm interested in are in that level of like, well, that's a bit odd, that kind of thing. But that doesn't mean I jump in and believe them completely, like truthers do. Truthers actually believe the latest video they've seen on YouTube, even though it might completely contradict the previous one. Now, I think, and then they go on a crusade, an evangelical crusade, to try and get other people to believe this stuff, and it often leads to mental problems and breakdowns and social isolation. One of the reasons I think I'm grateful for my paganism is I don't have an evangelical mentality. I don't feel I have to convert others to my way of thinking and come over to my side. Therefore, I don't talk about my interest in conspiracies to most people. When I go about my daily business at work and whatever, I'm talking about everything else. I don't really go into. I never go into it. It's only if someone asks me, "Oh yeah, definitely. I have a lot of books on. I've read a lot of books, and I'm very interested in a lot of that stuff, and I always will be. And I found it very rewarding in my life to look into that." And they say, "Well, that's a bit weird." It's not weird. It's kind of like journalism in a way, what journalism used to be. But I don't automatically always believe it, but I'm fascinated by it. Like, I'll give you an example, like vaccines, right? There's no doubt that vaccines work, okay? That vaccines have been a great thing for, things like measles and, rubella and lots of other things. It's chicken pox, for God's sake. They used to kill huge numbers of people, a lot of children around the world. And there's no doubt, and polio especially, there's no doubt at all that the traditional vaccines were a medical scientific miracle. There's no doubt about that. And that's why I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I don't like being around these anti-vaxxers for the sake of it. Now, at the same time, it should always be a choice. It should never be forced on someone. But the thing was with the needlecraft and the one that's come out for the COVID was simply I wasn't skeptical and I wasn't hesitant. I was out and out, no. Why? Because I don't trust corporations and I don't trust politicians. And if that makes me a tinfoil hat nut job for not trusting politicians and not trusting the CEO of major corporations, then so be it. But I don't. And that thing was rushed out. It was rushed out, and by their own documents, it became very apparent that this was a smash and grab raid. This was a kind of a pharmacological gold rush. And also, a basic look at the science was that wasn't a typical inoculation vaccine. This was an experimental RNA treatment. And that's why I said no. Not because I'm against them all, because I was like I'm not putting that thing in me. No way. What's wrong with that? That's called consumer choice. Does that make me batshit crazy? No. Maybe to you it does, but it doesn't to me. It just made me, I was like, well, no, that's how I am. Sorry. It's called, discretion. Doesn't make me a crazy nut job or anything like that. It just means that I have an opinion. And that's the end of it. And I'm glad, and looking at the way things are going now, I'm glad I didn't. Very glad I didn't. And that's okay. We live and learn. So, that they do, so that'd be on the kind of what you see. You take the, the people say, oh, all those shots are all dangerous, all of them from the beginning of time. It's all a scam. That's not true at all. Many of them have been colossal successes. But you take them one at a time. You don't have this blanket approach. And that's like comes out of me being a pagan, is that I don't have this one God, one focus, one mentality that's either the truth or it's a lie or it's either a saint or a sinner. And there's no grey area. And my attitude is that you look into it, you make your own mind up, but you don't evangelize about it. I've never evangelized about it, and I never even really talk about it outside, like talking to you. And in real life, I don't bother with it at all, really. So, what conspiracies are true? What I put on the definite truth, the JFK assassination, that's absolutely true. And ones have been proven to be true. Anyone who actually believes the Warren Commission at this point is probably mentally ill. Another one is that governments are hiding the huge rise in statistical deaths in Western nations at the moment since 2021. That's a fact. They're hiding it. The media's hiding it. That's a fact. Another conspiracy is things like the media is completely corrupt. Like I can remember, and this goes on in every country, that they had a meeting in Dublin in 2009 or 8, I can't remember what it was, opened by the President of Ireland at the time, Mary McAleese, and with David Rockefeller in attendance. Was it Rockefeller? It was one of the Rockefellers. And the Bilderbergs, the Trilateral Commission, were both in Dublin. And all the biggest leaders in the world. And there was a complete blackout by the Irish media. And you had the Irish Times, while it was going on, saying things like the Bilderbergs are a conspiracy theory, even though the Bilderbergs had a website up. And you had Pat Kenny on or Irish TV on one of these sort of like open forum talk show things, where a person in the audience said, we had the biggest meeting of globalists in Dublin last week, opened by the president, and there was a complete blackout by the Irish media. And he goes, I'm not going to go there. Call the Broadcasting Standards Authority if you want to deal with that. So that's a conspiracy theory that's absolutely true. The mainstream media are liars and they protect the globalists. That's completely true. That's completely true. The only reason they've stopped protecting the likes of the WEF and stuff is because of alternative media has blown them out of the water, and legacy media, mainstream media, is losing its audience because people have figured out they're a bunch of liars. They're a bunch of propagandists and liars. That's absolutely true. That's a conspiracy that's absolutely true. Another one is that's a true conspiracy is probably Drumblane in Scotland. That there was where all those children were murdered in the school. There was look into that one. I'm convinced that one was true, Drumblane, that happened. That was some kind of weird kinky sex thing between British politicians and local masons and stuff like that, and it ended up as being used as this as a front to take to increase gun control in the UK. I really do believe Drumblane was a real conspiracy. I have no doubt about that one. So instead of looking at bollocks like the Hampstead hoax or Holly Grieg, the wailings of unstable women against their exes, go look at the real ones like that. Yeah, that was a real one. What else would be real? There's loads of them that are real. Yeah, I'm just going to go through them. The US definitely knew about Pearl Harbor, the Pearl Harbor attack before it happened, and even goaded them into it. That's definitely a real one. That the mafia is another one. Up until the early 1960s, and even later, maybe much later, mid 60s. If you were to say that the La Cosa Nostra has enormous controls inside the United States, Sicilian mafia. They're controlling the gambling industry in Las Vegas, the trade unions at the highest levels of government. You'll be called the tinfoil hat nut job. And then the movie The Godfather comes out, and all of a sudden it's accepted that they existed. People forget that the mafia was a thing. Another conspiracy theory is true is that the Manson family, and well, not Manson family, but Charles Manson was a CIA MK Ultra test subject. That's absolutely true. I've no doubt about that. And the whole Vincent Belosi thing was a setup to basically blame some kind of like radical hippie thing. Belosi was a nasty piece of work to create the whole helter skelter lie surrounding the murders of the Tate LaBianca murders, and to get the focus away from the CIA experimentation upon Charles Manson. That's why he never took the stand. And well, not really, and that's why the whole case was railroaded through with this whole thing of helter skelter and all the sensationalism. That was absolutely true. Another one is that the Dublin. We can see like loads of things that. This is driving me mad. Sorry, hold on a second. I have a lozenge here. Hold on. So, live. That cleared it. Okay. Anyway, you think I was a chain smoker or something? There's something in this car. It's like a chemical smell or something. And so anyway, the Vincent Belosi thing was bullshit. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Another one was like things like they've intercepted. Like not only did they have Woodward working for the Washington Post, who was a naval intelligence officer framing Nixon. You also had things like Max Hastings at the BBC was intercepted by the IRA in Derry in 1969, communicating with the British Army. You had a BBC so-called reporter working with the British Army through a secret phone line, where basically you were getting military briefs into the newsroom with the BBC, and Hastings was actually involved, because when he found out that people had been shot in Derry at the Bloody Sunday thing, he went, "Oh, splendid, splendid." And the officer went, "Well, it's not splendid if it turns out they're all civilians and they weren't armed." "Oh, splendid, more stiffies, please." You know, that was Max Hastings from the BBC. And that shows you the link between the intelligence services, the military, and the media. The mainstream media is just a wing of the mainstream media as just a wing of the military-industrial complex. So let's stitch it all. Let's stitch it all in together now, okay? When approaching conspiracies, don't be a Christian about it. Don't try to be evangelical about it and believe it all automatically. Accusations are not the same thing as guilt, and implementation is not the same thing as outcome. Okay, that's the important one. Secondly, don't assume they're all true or all bullshit. Look in and see for yourself. But obviously, some things like on a basic objective level, with any minor level of education, you can see that flat earth is bollocks. Don't get fired up on emotion. I'll give you another one. Here's a complete bullshit one as well. Satanic ritual abuse. I have seen no proof anywhere that satanic ritual abuse of children happens. Now, I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I've never. The whole phobia around that's going on everywhere comes directly out of a book that was published in the 80s by two lunatics who made up all these stories, and it went like wildfire in the media, and it led to this thing called the Satanic Panic. And all that is the leftover of that. There is no. That's what the Hampstead Hogue thing was all based on, a Satanic Panic. I have not seen to date any evidence of ritual satanic abuse in any. I have not seen hard evidence. I've only seen delusional psychotics, women making up lies, mostly women making up lies. But I've not seen any hard proof at all. But I've seen plenty of hard proof of ritual Catholic abuse, ritual Jewish abuse, and ritual Muslim child abuse. So how about those ones? Do you ever think that maybe they create satanic ritual abuse to take your mind off the real stuff? Have you ever thought about that for a minute? That goes on in the Abrahamic religions? That goes on with that? And before you start, don't say things, like the blood libel of the Jews. That stuff was never true. That stuff about the blood libel and, the little boys being killed for Passover bread. That was bollocks. That, and people say, well, they got, they got the Jews confessed. No, the Jews that were captured confessed in the same way that the witches confessed under extreme torture. Torture and a confession is not the same thing. They're two different things. The Jewish blood libel thing was a thing that started in England and Lincolnshire, I think, and spread throughout Europe. It's never been true. It would be totally against Jewish law in every way. There's not even a Jewish book you could actually point to that even suggests it should be in there, and so that's another one that's bollocks as well. Oh, complete bollocks, and that led to the whole satanic panic and everything that we had there, the witch burnings and the destruction of pagans. But I'm not putting down all Christians, but you have to remember that as soon as Christianity gets into a position of power, the first thing it looks for is heretics, and there'll be other Christians. Look what they did to the Cathars, and look what they did to the anyone that was, pagans. Look what they did. There seems to be within official. If you're a Christian, don't get involved in the churches because it's bad news. And if you haven't figured that one out, after the lockdown, you never will. Oh, also, the whole scamdemic was a conspiracy, no doubt about that. They knew from the start it was all bullshit, and it was just a plan. It was a test run for the future to get their kind of like great reset. Oh, I've no doubt about that. You can call me any name you want to that, but I believe that's true, absolutely. So there you go. Mix and see. You have the things that people who like see something will happen in the Middle East, like Israel bombs Gaza, and they'll get all angry about it. They'll be all like angry against the Jews and stuff and Zionists. And then the next things they're looking at ritual. They're looking at blood libel, videos made by Nazis. I think it's all connected. This kind of thing. That's all. That's the Christian mind virus. And again, if you're a Christian, try to be a kind of like don't get involved in groups and anything like that. Do it in your own soul, in your own consciousness, in your own mind, and just venerate what you believe to be true. Same with any religion. It's when congregationalism is a fucking terrible thing. That's why pagans don't have congregationalism and Hindus don't have it. It's a bad thing, congregationalism, and it just leads to groupthink and hysteria, and that's really what the truthers are. Conspiracy theorists are individuals, sort of like mavericks, looking at the world in a different way to try and find answers to outstanding questions they don't fully understand. Truthers are congregational. They have crusades. They have their internet crusades. They have their crusades on the internet. The Hampstead Hoax was a classic one. Complete bullshit that was. Complete bullshit. And another one was the Holly Grieg thing. That was a lot of bollocks as well. And in both cases, it was both borderline women, hiring cooks and white knight types to groom kids to say lies. And the whole bullshit, children never lie. Of course they fucking lie. Terrible liars. And they make up things constantly. But that's not being children or evil or anything. It's just they don't take the word of children that way. Yeah, and there's loads of things like I do, and from all the years watching my stuff what I've been into and what I've gone down those rabbit holes, and sometimes I'd say it's not true now. It's not true. It's close to being true. Look, Manny over in who did a thing on the Son of Sam killings, and he came to the conclusion that Maury Terry was an alcoholic liar. After all the years of looking down that road, Manny decided that it's bollocks, and he pulled the videos from his channel. That's a highly respected thing in my world, to do that. To admit you're wrong is a wonderful thing, because how else do you learn, to move on the right path? So if you like, my way of closing this would be, conspiracy theory is something that I feel is quite noble. I think it's quite a noble thing. Because it once it's not rooted in paranoia or hysteria, it's a good cynical template from which you to live your life, because it can serve you in all kinds of things in your own life, and it's interesting and it's fun. I find conspiracy theories lots of fun to actually read up on them. Obviously there's gruesome things and stuff like that, but when I'm looking down the rabbit hole of like things and I'm studying them, like I'll give you another example. One, for years they were told that a Nazi occult was a conspiracy theory and there was almost nothing to it. My God, shitloads of evidence to it. And when I was heavily researching Walpurgis Night, I went deep into that world, looking at it, and I found it fascinating and rewarding and interesting, and gave me the toolkits to see what's going on in the world today at the higher levels. It was, it was a fantastic education I got, and and I feel great about that. That was a very worthwhile pursuit. And so, look, approach it as like a hobby, approach it like an interest, approach it like a skill. But don't become evangelical about it and screaming about it. Don't assume that an accusation is automatic guilt. That's what truthers do. Be a truth seeker, not a truther. And don't be afraid to admit you went down the wrong rabbit holes and you were wrong. I mean, that's okay. Just like Manny Grossman did. That's okay. That just means you're refining your consciousness and your intellect and your cognitive processing towards something worthwhile. That's actually, if you wanted to have, but Manny Grossman has gone on to other things. He's not become like one of these people that goes around going, I was a conspiracy theorist, I was, and I now believe that all conspiracies are not real, and when I got out of rehab. You see, just because you devote your life to some bullshit like the Tataria thing, and you find out it's bollocks, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Not at all. Go look at other things. And so there you go. You can those of you who call me a conspiracy theorist and think I'm embarrassed by it, well, I'm not embarrassed by it at all. I feel like it's like when gay people start to call themselves queers. It's like, yeah, that's what we are. We're different. And it's the same thing with conspiracy theorists. Yeah, that's what we are. We're different. Well, it doesn't make us all idiots, and it doesn't make us all mentally ill or wrong or wasting our lives. In fact, it's anything but wasting your life. It's a fulfilling thing. If you do it properly without the the evangelist mentality, without the need to feel social justice from it. I'm going to bring justice to the world. I'm going to go downtown and bang a drum screaming about the New World Order. And also, don't become consumed by it. Jesus Christ, that's the worst one of all. People who live in the conspiracy world 24/7, when the flowers are growing, when kittens are born, when nature is beautiful, when you can go for a swim in the sea, or you can go to an art gallery or a museum, or you can have a cup of coffee. Don't go to the point where that's all you think about. You see, that's against the evangelical thing. Christianity and the actual, organized Christianity has damaged the West so badly by creating crusaders and, obsessional types that like turn things into religions. Be very casual about it. Be very casual. And, and you'll find it greatly rewarding. And we all know that the term conspiracy theory was invented by the CIA to stop people from looking at conspiracy theory. I mean, that's so that's the ultimate conspiracy theory of all, isn't it? That the term conspiracy theory is a conspiracy theory. Gosh, there you go. That's a perfect closing to it. Sorry for all the coughing. I'll edit them out in the video. And don't forget, tonight on Beyond Room 313, Hocus Focus with myself and Sarah Joe. And have a beautiful Sunday. Go out and do something nice. And yet, conspiracies are real. But you know what? The happiness and enjoyment that you get in this life from little things that make you happy and give you enjoyment, they're more real.